I'm Father Fred Mertz. I was pastor back in the 1970s for 5 years at Incarnation. And as I say, I was very fortunate to have Father Adrian and Father Malone with me helping out. And and Sister Marion McCarthy, the marvelous lady, was the principal of the school and all that sort of thing. So it was a bumpy time because there was a lot of going back and forward, and it wasn't always, there were wonderful moments, but there were moments when it was rather difficult. We had, well, for one thing, we had a fire in the church, we had a flooding in the school, the second school, and we had a lot of things that seemed to happen, and gosh, you know, it was arson. It was some kids, I think. I went over with an extinguisher, and it didn't do much. They heard about this wall of flame, and there is such a thing. And I made some mistakes. We should put that in there. And one of the things I remember, we had a wonderful gal, and I can't remember her name now, but we had her lead the singing. And see, this was new to some people, so they didn't just see it as something new. They saw it almost as a kind of an affront. She was just an ideal person to lead, and she had a marvelous voice, and so there were some people disturbed about that. You know, these things happen. Well, I think just working with Adrian and Malone was a real pleasure, because I still value them as very, very able, wonderful men. Malone came to me once and he said, you know, I'd like to study law. And I said, John, why would you study law? He said, to become a lawyer. I said, yeah, I know that, but what's the point? Well, he was going to help people with, and he studied law, and now, of course, he is a professor of law. He has been at St. Thomas College, and he still teaches over in England. He teaches law. So, and Steve Adrian, one day he came in, and there was a fellow that had become, he was in St. Paul. He was running for mayor of St. Paul. He was a minister. And Steve had only been ordained a few years, and he said, what have I ever done? I said, what? Well, you know, and I said, well, so we kidded. We said, well, you'll have you running, and we'll get you in there someplace. And it was a joke. But somebody heard it in the office there, where we were at dining, but they heard us. And they said, this guy came in and said, Father Adrian, that's wonderful. We'll back you up. So then I said to Steve, what the heck, why don't you do it? It'd be kind of fun, and it might get some people interested in things that we have, you know, fields that are important to Catholics. And so he did it. Well, then I got called into the chancery, and it was Leo Byrne at that time, and he said, I don't get it. He said, now one man is studying law, the other man is running for state senator. You know, what kind of a zoo are you running with? I said, it's all about abortion, which was not true, but I threw that in. He said, can't other people? Oh, I said, it wouldn't have the same impact. But nothing happened. And later on, he used to take Adrian with him around giving talks. And so they both proved their worth in 100 ways. So yeah, the election was worth the effort. And actually, he did very well. There were 4 candidates. Well, he probably told you all this. And he had the top 2 were Republican. It's a Republican district. The top 2 won like 8,000 and 7,500. Steve independent, had 6,000 votes. So we were all happy, and I think he was just as happy he didn't have to do that stuff. But it was a time of, we had a lot of fun together. I still treasure them as friends. I was very much against the war. I don't know how much of that I did in church. I did that elsewhere. I think I may have mentioned it in church. But I think the protests that we did were done elsewhere.
Okay.
In the pre-Senate, I remember I talked a lot about Vietnam, and I wrote articles on it and so on. So for the Catholic Bulletin in those days. But yeah. I don't think I did a lot of that in the parish, but maybe some. It sounded perfect to me, because what it meant was a parish would adopt a day, and they would buy the food, cook the food, serve the food. I wrote about what I thought was an honest picture of what had happened in the priesthood in my time. Some of it is, anyway, it's called The Ore and the Dross, meaning that once you're ordained, you're not all done, you're developing, and so there's a lot of ore that comes out as you, there's a lot of dross too, and so this was a picture of priests and their various reactions to the times, and so some people liked it, some people didn't like it.
Yeah.
I wrote that, yeah, I do remember that. I wrote that after I retired from Assumption, around 1990, I suppose, 1991, someplace in there.
Okay.
So I had time.
Sure.
And I sat down and wrote it here, and then my typing is, so it took quite a while to get the type. The writing I did quite quickly, but I had to put it in. So I gave it to the Grey Wolf Press, and they weren't interested, so I thought, well, I'll print it myself. So that's how. When I was on the priest senate, they wanted to vote that you'd only have so many years, something like 10 or 11 or 12, something like that. And I voted against it. I thought, I know what they're trying to do. They get some guy in there that was a great difficulty, and they didn't know how to get him out. So if you have a terminus, then, but I thought that's that's like, you know, trying to kill a sparrow with a shotgun. And so I said, no, don't do this. And now they do it. It's in the books, but a lot of guys just keep on going. And it should be, because some of them are doing a very fine job,
yes.
And the people would miss the particular values and virtues they bring to the job. So she was a hard-working lady, yeah. And she had raised her children. I think she was divorced. She had to raise her children. And she worked very hard as an organist. She did a lot of things. No, Incarnation was a place I often went to when I was up on the north side of Minneapolis at Ascension, where I was there for 10 years. And I had Father Toohey, who was a classmate of mine, and Father Jerry Kenny. So I used to hoot down there about 9, 10 o'clock at night and sit around and talk far into the night with those guys. And it was always a very interesting time. So. Of course, they're both long gone, I'm sorry to say, but they were wonderful guys.
What?
Incarnation. Really well done, yeah. That's why the fire was so scary. I said to the firemen when they came in, I said, well, of course it's a brick building. He said, Father, you don't understand. The bottom is wood, the top is not a lot of wood. That could burn out and then your bricks just collapse. So we were probably a quarter of an hour away from total collapse. Well, how did we do that? See, the church itself was only partially affected. You mentioned the sacristy, that's true, that's where the big thing was. But they also, I think, lit the altar cloths on the main altar. And but the damage to the main church was minimal, I think. But if it had been left go, and Elsie Darris was our secretary at that time, and somebody said there's a fire in the church, and I just yelled to her. I said, call the fire department. And that's when I got the extinguisher and went over there. Was not very successful. And the firemen got there very quickly, and I doubt if my little extinguisher did anything at all, but we tried. And so we got it all fixed up. Our insurance took care of it. But then the insurance company, we'd also had a flooding in the school across the street from there. And so the insurance company said, goodbye. That's enough out of you. Oh, that's a beautiful building. They don't do that anymore. Build them like that. So it's quite nice. The staff and the parishioners of Incarnation, a very happy anniversary. It's been a remarkable parish in the work of the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis.